Hello everybody and welcome back to Screen Stars and welcome to another of my classic film reviews. Today's classic film review is for the 1985 classic horror film Fright Night, a film that is co-written and directed by Tom Holland. No, not Spider-Man's Tom Holland, a different one. And it stars Chris Sarandon, William Ragsdale, Amanda Bearse, Roddy Mcdowell, the late great Roddy Mcdowell, Stephen Jeffries, Jonathan Stark and Dorothy Fielding, and it focuses on Charlie Brewster, played by William Ragsdale, who notices that he has a new neighbour moving next door and is fairly convinced, after watching him over a number of nights, that he is a vampire. He tries very hard to convince everybody, to very little success, and he enlists the help of Roddy McDowell's Peter Vincent, an ageing horror actor who was known in the movies for killing many a vampire, and he tries to bring him on board to help him take down Jerry Dandridge, his evil vampire neighbour. Right, so I don't need to really talk an awful lot about the story here. I'm sure if you're watching this review you've probably seen Fright Night, and if you haven't, stop this review immediately and go and watch it, because it is one of these all-time classics from the 80s that has stood the test of time, and it's highly entertaining, fun, cheesy, corny horror film. Well, actually it's a horror comedy really, let's get it right, because it's very funny at times, all this film. Now, I watched this fairly recently once again with my wife, who, believe it or not, had never seen the film. Now, it was a little odd early on because she wasn't enjoying it. I think sometimes she struggles, or maybe some of you struggle, when you watch something from the 80s you've never seen before. You forget it's a film of its time most of the time, and this film certainly is a film of its time in regards to being set in the 80s. And I think once you make that adjustment in your head, as my wife did about a quarter of the way through, and I just said to her, I said, look, just enjoy what's in front of you, just enjoy the film. And she did. After that, she really enjoyed it then. She enjoyed it for what it was, a fun, entertaining horror film that gives you a few giggles here and there, with some brilliant effects and some good scares. It's one of those that really has stood the test of time. They did do a sequel, Fright Night 2, which I do remember seeing. I've not seen it as much as this one. I don't know if they did any more after that, and obviously then they did the remake with Colin Farrell, was it? Yeah, that was pretty decent. I do remember that because David Tennant was in that as well. I do remember watching that when it came out, and I was pleasantly surprised by that one. And is there a sequel to that as well? A cheap sequel to that I haven't seen. So this franchise, this film, whatever you want to call it, has got a patchy past, if you like, in regards to sequels and reboots and remakes. But the one that stands head and shoulders above all of them is this first one. It's so nicely put together. It really is. And it's one of those I've always thought watching it. And sometimes you watch a film because there's not an awful lot of sets here. You've just got a couple of houses and a nightclub here and there. It'd probably have made a really good stage play, something like this, because of the enclosed spaces that they're in and things like that. Roddy Mcdowell, I want to talk a little bit about Roddy Mcdowell here, really makes this movie, I think. Without Roddy Mcdowell, I think this movie is a much lesser movie. He was magnificent as Peter Vincent. Roddy Mcdowell was a wonderful actor, a great character actor, and he really sold this part and sold this movie, as did Chris Sarandon as Jerry Dandridge, who steals most of the scenes he's in. He hams it up wonderfully as this vampire, very sexualized vampire, I suppose it's fair to say. And I think from this movie onwards, when vampire movies had this reputation for vampires to be overly sexualized, I think this vampire film had an awful lot to do with that, if I'm being perfectly honest. I know you could go back to the Hammer films and they've all been, vampire movies have been sexualized in some way, but I think it's fair to say Jerry Danwich liked the ladies in this film, and I think Chris Sarandon was a brilliant vampire in this. I think if I was to list my top 10 favourite vampires, he would be very high on the list, I think, because he does a really, really good part. The effects, I think, are brilliant, and they still stand up today. It's one of those, it's not even, I was about to say it's a cult, this film was one of those cult classics. It's not a cult classic because it broke through cult status into the mainstream, this film. And the effects are wonderful, and they still stand out. They're wildly over the top. The vampire effects are fantastic. You don't just get someone with a cheap set of fangs, you know what I mean? You get like different stages of vampires in this film, which I really liked. You get the mist, you get the wolf, all this kind of stuff, the bat, almost like that. The huge demonic look of these vampires when they're fully transformed. There's all these different stages of vampires that they show in this film, and they really dive deep into like the mythos of vampires and the lore of vampires. And it's just a really brilliant 80s comedy, really corny, really fun, really entertaining, and it's one of those that you can watch. I mean, I've watched this. I haven't watched it an awful lot over the last, I don't know, decade or so, but before that, certainly in my teens and things like that, this was one of those that was on the the shelf that gets watched a lot on VHS. You have to have it on VHS. This, I think I had the second one on VHS as well, although I didn't watch that as much as this one. So what is else to say about Fright Night? It's an 80s classic. It is still brilliant to this day. It is arguably one of the best vampire films ever made, and it is certainly one you need to watch if you haven't seen it. So it's just easily a 9 out of 10. It was almost a 10 out of 10, but there are some flaws here and there. So that is my review for Fright Night, my classic film review. I hope you liked it. If you did, please like and subscribe, and of course I will be back with more reviews and content very, very soon. Any suggestions for any classic film reviews, pop them in the comments, and if it's a film I like and I deem it a classic, I suppose, I will obviously give it a watch, a rewatch and a review, and pop it on the channel. So thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time on Screen Stars.